Hi all, this is the MakeHaven badging video for the router table. The router table is a super cool tool. It's a router, so it's just a motor that has been mounted in a table to keep it still, and now you move the piece, versus a typical handheld router where you lock down your workpiece and move the router. The one motion that the router table offers in terms of the tool is up and down, so so that you can adjust the height of your bit, or how much the bit is exposed. In terms of the bits that we use for the router table, they're the same ones we use for the other routers. They're located on the shelf with all the other router bits. I grabbed one of the boxes so that we can look at some of the options. There is one classification of the router bits is those with bearings and those without. The purpose of using a router bit with a bearing is so that the bearing on top can follow your workpiece and prevent the blades from going in any deeper than the bearing allows. So that can be really convenient for doing flush cuts of edges, for trimming, for doing a roundover like this bit. When you're looking at the bits, they have pictures on the inside that show in general what the bit is going to do, which is one reason why it's helpful to make sure you put the bit back in the place where it came from, so the next person can see which bit is going to make which shape, so that you have a good sense of what you're getting. It's also, in addition to the shape, it shows the size. So this is an 1/8 inch roundover, and you know that because it says it right here, and you don't have to measure or guess. So that's convenient. We're going to do the roundover bit because that's a fairly common bit that gets used. And so first we're going to go over how to put the bit in. The first step is to take this acrylic wrench and put it in the table insert. Confusingly, to loosen it, you turn to the right. So we're going to go righty-loosey on this one, and then pull this insert out. Next, we're going to insert the bit into the collet. So a collet is a type of chuck for holding a bit that is only for a certain size. All of the bits over here have a 1/4 inch shank. So that shank is going into the 1/4 inch collet. If you need a bigger bit, so you've chosen a bit that's really large and has a 1/2 inch shank, then you can take this collet out by unscrewing the nut and pushing the collet out from underneath. So you would just take this and give it a little push from underneath. You can remove that collet, and it lives right on the side here where the 1/4 inch collet adapter label shows. So it just lives right there. But in general, unless you're using a really large bit, we're going to be using 1/4 inch shanks, so that's okay. So again, the collet goes right inside, the collet adapter goes right inside this other collet and then screws down right on top. So now that we have the proper size collet in there, we'll put the bit in. In general, you want it about 2/3 up the length of the shank. There's a bit of a curve up at the top, and you don't want it to be biting all the way up there. You also don't want it holding on to just a little bit of the shank. So we're going to put it in maybe 2/3 of the way, and then we're going to use these collet wrenches to tighten it. They have these offset heads, which is convenient for getting down into the bed. So one is going to hold the bottom, and the other one is going to hold the top. And we're just going to tighten down. It doesn't need to be crazy tight, but just snug. And then we can put those back. I'm just going to show you now, how we take it out. So like we'll do at the end. And the way you do that is you just do it in reverse. The only trick is that you loosen it, you spin it off, and then you actually have to loosen it one more time just to sort of pop out the collet, and then you can remove the bit. So that's the trick that catches some people. So we'll tighten that back down, and again, just snug, and put these collet wrenches back on the side. The next step is putting the throat plate back in. There are 3 different sizes of throat plate. This is the medium one, and so that's about the right size for sitting right in here. And then we're going to use the throat plate wrench, and again, left is going to tighten it, and right is going to loosen it. So now that is all set up. Because we have a bearing in here, we don't need to use any other fence to guide our piece. So what we can do is just use that bearing to guide it. So let's say this was a cutting board or some other piece that we wanted to put a roundover on. We can just push it right up against the bearing, and that's going to guide where it's going to go. So there are a few steps to using this. The most important in terms of safety, as always, is to make sure there's nothing hanging that could get tangled on the bit. It's a very powerful motor that's spinning very fast. So if anything does get caught in it, it's going to pull it way quicker than you can respond. The second is, because it's so powerful, you really want to make sure your piece is held onto very firmly. In terms of moving the piece, you're always going to move the piece to the left. So the blade is spinning in this direction, and the teeth are spinning to our right. And what that means is that we need to make sure we're pushing into the blade. So same as on the chop saw and any other number of tools, we want to make sure that we're not going in the direction that it's spinning, because that runs the risk of it just throwing our piece. We want to make sure we're in control and we're pushing into the blade. So on the router table, we always go to the left. So what we're going to do with this roundover bit is, before we take it to our nice final piece of wood, be that a chair leg or a cutting board, we're going to calibrate it. And what that means in this case is we want this lower edge of the bit to be just flush with the throat plate. So we're going to use this wrench to lower the router. The numbers that are located on this indicator indicate the relative movement. So one full turn is is 1/8 of an inch. So we, 1/16 of an inch. So that's just sort of if you want to move it relative to a certain indicator or a certain previous amount, that's how you'd use it. But it doesn't show the absolute position. So in this case, we want to lower it so that the edge is just flush with the top of the table. And in this case, we can either use our piece of wood to get a sense or just eyeball it, because what we're going to do is actually take a test cut, look at that, and then see how we need to move it up or down so that we go to our final piece, it's in the right position. Something that confuses some people here is that the reason we can use a test piece is because we're calibrating the blade's position relative to the table. So it doesn't matter where the piece that we're actually cutting. No matter how big or small the actual workpiece is, the calibrating piece is going to represent it just fine. So on the bottom of the table, there is a power switch and a speed switch. So the speed switch is going to control how fast it spins. It goes all the way from very fast to still very fast. So it's from 10,000 RPM to 20,000, I believe. The bigger your bit, the slower you want it to spin, because the edge of that bit is going to spin really quickly to catch up if it's a bigger bit. So that, again, the bigger the bit, the slower the speed. The smaller the bit, the higher the speed. This bit is relatively small, so we can put it in the middle or maybe even a little high. The other switch on the bottom is the power switch, and that's the one closest to us conveniently. So what I'm going to do is make sure my safety glasses are on, and then turn this on. Again, I'm going to be holding on very firmly and moving to the left, and just taking a small cut just to see the position. So you can see here that the cut was actually pretty perfect on the first go, which is not typical. Usually it'll be a little too deep and there'll be a little ledge, so you'll have to lower it, or it'll be a little too shallow and it won't have that full round over. But now that we have it at the right height, we can confidently take our final piece and do the cut on there. This particular router table comes with a very advanced fence. It's located on the left side of it, and it has a large manual. So if you'd like to see how to do some of the advanced joinery that this router table allows for in that fence, then feel free to get into that, but we're not going to dive into that in this video. The one fence we are going to use occasionally is this simple fence that's located on the top. Feel free to move it if it's not convenient to you, but it's relatively simple. There's a knob on the back end, so you can just loosen that, move it into a position that's useful to you, and then lock it back down. So as I mentioned, you wouldn't need a fence if you're using a bearing, because the bearing acts as the fence. But if you wanted to make a slot, for example, so you're using a straight cut bit that was cutting a slot through your piece of wood, then you would put your piece here, pushed up against the fence, and push it through through your bit. Again, you're moving to the left. In this case, the bit is going to be pushing your piece against the fence, which is important. If you were to go to the right, it would push it away from your fence. If you'd like, there are also the yellow gripper push blocks next to the table saw. So if you feel like your fingers are getting too close to the blade, if they're within the throat plate, then you can use those to hold on and push the piece through. What you want to do is, occasionally if you're removing a large amount of wood, especially in a hardwood, you want to be progressive. So you want to take a shallow pass and then raise the bit slowly so that you're only taking out a reasonable amount of wood at a time. And then finally, on the last pass, you might even take a particularly shallow pass to leave a very clean cut, so the blade isn't taking out a lot of wood on that last pass. When you're done using the router table, it doesn't have a built-in vacuum, so you need to make sure to grab one of the vacuums that's rolling around the shop, vacuum up on top, on the sides, and underneath the router table, and then just take the bit and make sure to put it back in the case so that it doesn't get hit and so it's there for the next person. Thanks for watching.